PowerPoint pulled up on my side. We're going to be getting going with some introductions today, just kind of setting the purpose. I think you guys both know Leanne and I, but if you want to, if we could take a couple minutes and just hear from you about who's on board today, and if you can briefly let us know what job talks you were thinking about in terms of, we asked you to identify a couple of positions. So would a couple of you just volunteer and share out what you thought your potential dream jobs might be, your dream job and your safe job? Lisa, will you start?
Sure. I'm in the job process right now. My dream job doesn't have a posting, but it would be Vanderbilt, working at Vanderbilt or my alma mater at University of Missouri. But the one that I've applied for would be the position at Stanford. And then my safe job, really courting University of Iowa. And I have an interview with them next week.
Cool. Thanks for sharing.
Definitely.
And anybody else that's in the process right now?
This is Sam from UIC. I guess my dream job is there's actually a position in my line of research at Vanderbilt right now. So that's my dream one. And then my safe one is at Illinois State, which is my alma mater. And I have an interview with them next week as well.
Awesome. So this is timely for you guys. How about you, Katie?
Hi, how are you? I think my dream job, might be Wheaton College I applied for, which is a school that I went to. And my safe position probably would be a local college, Eastern College here, so.
Cool. And who else have we got on there? We've heard from Lisa, Sam, and Katie. Who else is on with us now? I can see Catherine.
Well, maybe we'll get more sharing here soon.
Okay, yeah, anyway, our agenda for today is to kind of talk a little bit big picture about job talks. We're going to primarily talk about higher ed types of job talks, and towards the end we'll talk a little bit about different varying types of job talks. I'm going to kick off by describing kind of the idea of building a conceptual framework about your research for a job talk. Leanne's going to talk a little bit about the meat and the content of and choosing what to spend more time on, and then how to kind of avoid some minefields and manage some potential potholes along the way. I think some of the articles that you read in advance of today would give you some ideas of where we're coming from. And then at the end of the day today, we're going to have you create your job talk for Austin on your own time, and be able to share that either with your advisor or with someone that you've identified as a potential NCLII outside committee person for yourself. And there are links to a couple of TED Talks that you may or may not have seen. Veronica, I know you're familiar with a couple of them. One is by Angela Duckworth, and we're going to be talking a little bit about her research today. And another one is by Carol Dweck. Before we get started, does anybody have any questions at all? Okay, so as we're getting going, you're going to be able to go into Nearpod and let us know a little bit more about your ideal job once you're ready to end the NCLII doc training program.
And so you'll see a survey in front of you right now. If you want to take a minute and just indicate what are you thinking will be the kind of job that you'd like to be entering into as you leave the safety of your doc program. And if you'll just select that and hit submit. I'm going to pause just for a couple more of you to respond. And then we will share. Now you will see.
We're looking to make the gray space a little smaller.
Well, I think there's a couple of us logged in that won't be responding. So
True.
I think there's only one or two other folks that maybe are still considering what their response might be.
Okay. So it looks like most of you anyway are interested in a higher ed tenure track position with a research priority. And it looks like the next choice so far that's been selected is to look for a job that would have kind of equal priorities in terms of teaching and teacher preparation. Cool. And my computer keeps telling me it wants to reboot, and I keep fighting back. So hopefully it's going. I mentioned that we were going to talk a little bit about a conceptual framework. And I don't know if you guys are familiar with this text. It's a really helpful text that informs not just how you review literature, but also how you kind of contextualize your work. So as you're thinking about reaching out to higher ed audiences, it'll be important to explain why your research is cutting edge, how it builds on prior research, and that to show that you've used rigorous methods. So a conceptual framework includes not only the theory of why your work is important or your hypotheses of what you think is going to happen, but also the empirical research in your particular area. And this is going to begin to develop and morph as you test your hypotheses. Before we go, let's go on to the next slide, Leanne. Thanks. So again, a conceptual framework is going to mesh those things together, allowing you to begin to describe your own research as being coherent and constituting a whole line of research. So the conceptual framework will help your audience understand why your study is important. It will situate it within current research, and it can also describe or help you describe and articulate what your discussion of directions for next research might be. And in this book, Reason and Rigor, the authors talk quite a bit about considering whether your theoretical framework for your work and for your teaching is kind of off the shelf. Is it something that's already been developed and you're extending it a little bit? Or whether it's something that's going to be combining a variety of different research buckets, if you will. And in the book Reason and Rigor, the third chapter really focuses on Angela Duckworth. And Angela Duckworth, as you guys may be aware, is a professor at University of Pennsylvania. She's a best-selling author, recently published a book on grit. And the conceptual framework that is her conceptual framework and how it's grown iteratively across time is really a nice example of meshing your personal interests, your experience, and along with the more informal methods of conversation with your mentors and with each other, like your NCLII experiences through lit review. And then also this experience kind of shapes your methodology. So to use her as an example, Duckworth started out as with a BA in neuroscience. she went on to, or neurobiology at Harvard. She went on to do neuroscience at Oxford. And then she had time in her life where she was a management consultant, so had lots of experience talking and interviewing informally and listening. And then she spent 5 years as a classroom math teacher in San Francisco, Pennsylvania, and New York City in public schools. And so when she started her PhD program at the University of Pennsylvania, she brought in those initial experiences, and she knew that she wanted to study this notion of why do some people give up too early and why do other people's really persevere and stick with it. And so she began with this idea, and her very first paper came out in 2007, and it was called Tracing Grit, Perseverance and Passion for Long-Term Goals. That was her very first paper, and she begins to really provide a conceptual framework that shows the interplay of her experiences as a classroom teacher and a management consultant, her intuitions about what she thought was important, how that was reframed through her review of the literature, and as she began to develop her methods. So when I say kind of informal conversation, she actually uses the words of interviewing the living and the dead. So she talks about having lots of conversations with her mentor, interviewing many people in the field about why grit might be an important and dissociable trait from things like IQ or extroversion or self-control. And as she began to do some interviews, she also considered her own experiences as a classroom teacher. She started off studying self-control, but eventually she realized that what she really wanted to look at was this notion of persistence. And so in terms of coming to what to study, then she began to move into her conceptual framework for how to study the problem. So initially, she decided to create a measure since none had existed, and she created a large measure based on wording from some of her interviews, and then she conducted a series of 6 studies in a variety of settings to show that grit was more associated with positive outcomes than these other constructs like IQ or ability or even quality. So she showed that older and better educated people are grittier than younger ones. She did a couple of convenience samples with undergrads at University of Pennsylvania that showed students that rated themselves as higher on a grit scale ended up having higher GPA, and so that predicted more strongly than SAT scores. And she went on to show that West Point cadets were less likely to drop out if they were gritty, and that the kids that won the spelling bee were also more gritty. So in thinking about all of her findings, she's really wrapped together her experiences, her review of the research, and her beginning methodology. So we wanted you to keep in mind this idea of what a conceptual framework can be for a particular study or across the line of research as you're showcasing what you're doing now and what you might do in the future. So if you want to advance this slide, Leanne. So as I said, we might have a theoretical frame or a conceptual frame that's pretty much a good fit. You may be a strong behaviorist, for example, but you might have other intellectual bins to sort of bring to the table. And I'm going to show you Leanne's going to show you a couple of examples from Eric Carter from a job talk he gave, where he talks about his overall research focus. And you can see on the slide his goal is to implement a program of research that's responsive to local, state, and national needs, promote systematic change, etc., etc. And then he divides those into 2 different sub-goals that are showing where he's hoping his research is going to go. And you can see below the Venn diagram that shows the particular buckets that are of his research interests. And if you advance the slide one more, he also created a slide for his job talk that shows where these two tracks are going, and you can see the check marks which represent studies that he's already conducted, leaving lots of unchecked boxes to show his potential academic colleagues that he has a whole program that he has in mind and who he wants to work with. So I think these slides provide a really ambitious example, but we wanted to share them with you so that as you start your job talk for Austin, you can think about having a slide that you might land on that really allows you to situate a lot of your work in a very visual sort of a fashion.
Oops, gotta go back. Sorry.
Yeah, and so what we're going to be doing is to go back to Nearpod again and letting you take a few minutes to think about your framework for your own research interests and begin to kind of play around with a sketch or a visual representation of either what your studies might look like or what theoretical and conceptual bins you might need to hold your work.
So if you'll take a minute here and think, you can use the tools on the bottom here, and you'll see I'm doing it here just to give you a little demonstration of what you could be doing. And just take a minute and see, or if you've got a picture you want to be able to upload, we'll let you think about that for a couple minutes here, and then hit submit when you're done. And then we will be taking a look as they come in, and we may pop a couple of them up to show folks. And if you're willing, have you just reflect a little bit on those. So we'll stop talking for a minute and let you think and draw.
I'm going to mute myself for the moment.
Mm-hmm. Suddenly feeling the awkward pause. I should have planned some gentle music while you were thinking. So we don't have any brave souls yet that have submitted any drawings for us. So we'll give you just a couple more minutes.
And you can also unmute yourself and ask questions if this is confusing to you.
I have found this to be one of the most challenging parts of how to convey how your work all fits together, and where does a certain arrow go and which direction does it point, and am I talking overlapping circles or separate buckets of things? So it really is it's such an important thing to be thinking about, how to visually represent your work, but I do think it's challenging. So I hope some of you are starting to think about this a little bit.
So if you guys might think too, for example, about Bronfenbrenner's work, where the child is nested within the teacher and within the school and then within the community, and the family is represented very close to the child. So you might think about how you nest your work or you nest your research questions within a theory. Or it might be that some of you that are working in the area related to some serious behaviors might have buckets that relate to policy interests or the need for certain, for merging of academic and social and emotional needs along with the behavior structures being more of a foundation. So I think there's lots of different ways to represent that. But if,
So we do have, I'm sorry, I'm cutting you off, Stephanie. We do have one drawing submitted from Lisa, but I know as soon as I share it or share any of the drawings, all of you have to stop drawing. So I'm going to give you, this is your little 30-second warning to finish whatever drawing you're working on, and then we'll start showing a couple and asking you guys if you're willing to share just a little bit. And if I put yours up and you're not comfortable talking too much about it, that's okay. We'll just pause for a minute so people can see it, and we'll move on to another one. So I'm going to give you just a few more seconds. What was that, Stephanie?
Had someone ask again for the code. It's CDYSU.
Yeah. Okay, so I think maybe we'll go ahead and share a couple and keep us moving along. So I'm going to put, I am not presenting names with these. And so if you choose to talk a little bit about yours, if you see yours come up, feel free. Otherwise, we'll pause for just a minute and move on to the next one.
I can imagine myself linking circles with this person. I share
Yep.
a lot of interests, so it would be really easy for me to say, hey, this is somebody I'd really like at my institution because they're interested in some of the things that I'm interested in, and they're situating it at a university site that geographically is surrounded by lots and lots of multilingual learners with lots of reading challenges.
Can you hear me? This is Veronica.
Yeah.
Yes, we can.
Hi, this is mine, so I'm happy to answer questions. But I will say that I think one of the things that I plan to do is to emphasize that in some cases, I'm well aware that some of my work has been around bilingual students learning in a setting where they have access to their native language, but I don't think that that is necessarily something that I need to kind of pigeonhole myself into, because there are learners learning in pull-out English as a second language services. And so that's one thing that I'll need to make clear somehow whenever I'm looking at different communities around universities.
Good point.
Great. So we'll share one more here.
This is mine. So the idea that I started here was that my big idea is that I really want to make teachers and students to have an understanding of data and being able to read their data and evaluate their performance. So I have 2 lines of research going, where I have this Data Mountain program that's based in self-determination, and I'm keep building that study up. And there's many questions I think that can go along with that. So I have some area for future there. But I'm really also interested in this program being feasible for teachers. So I've started looking at what the current professional development literature says and getting involved in database decision making for teachers. And then there's a project about that I'm doing that's looking at how to measure pre-service teacher behavior. So bridging these two things together, it really comes down to everybody understanding and loving data. So I think I have like areas to go for the future and how to bridge these two separate research lines together.
Great, Lisa. I think another point you could also use as part of a conceptual framework is the Supreme Court case of Andrew versus Douglas County, right? Where there's a real or a policy need for helping teachers understand how to use data. So you can also, I bring that as an example of how some of you who have interest in policy or advocacy might have another bucket in addition to Lisa's focus that might relate more to impactful change at a particular state or region or related to national laws.
Yeah, that's a wonderful idea. Thank you. That's great. I like this bucket term.
Well, thank you for sharing all of that. I know that it's tricky to really think through how to visually represent different things that you're working on, which especially, and I'm imagining that you guys have this experience too, like I had, of you get involved in different types of activities and sometimes they feel very distinct from one another. And as much as you can pull those things together, I think to represent a cohesive, or at least there's a thread that binds things together, can be really helpful in representing the comprehensive nature of your preparation and the work where you're headed. So our next job is to try to help hone in on what to actually talk about during your job talk. And so we've shared a few links to a couple of different brief papers and blog postings that are designed to give you a few ideas of things to just keep in mind. And hopefully you'll find these things helpful. The first one, I think, is a really nice set of just this idea of being very simple and limiting how much you talk about during your job talk, and focus your slides in a very specific way. And we're going to give you some ideas about that here in the next couple of minutes. The second one that's there gives you a nice way to think about knowing your audience and how to prepare yourself for talking in a certain tone and presenting things in a certain way that are designed to really help you connect with your audience, and make sure that the work that you've done and the effort you've put into creating your conceptual model really maps onto the audience that's there and the folks that you want to be able to convey why they need to hire you and the things that you bring to their institution. And then the last couple offer some really specific pieces of advice that I encourage you to also take a look at. We'll talk through some of those things when we get into the nitty-gritty, but we just want to call your attention to those as resources as you start to, I think, probably work a little more concretely in preparing yourself for the job talk for Austin, that there are some things there and some tips that you might want to just refresh yourself on in that preparation as you move further into this process. So one of the things we also really wanted to emphasize is that this is your opportunity to tell a story about yourself. And as is reflected in a couple of these papers that we've shared with you, they do present this idea of you're putting on a show and to treat this as a performance. It's not it's similar to other presentations you've given in that you need to go in organized and have a clear sense of what you're trying to convey. But this really is your opportunity to sell yourself to the entity that you're trying to get a position with. And so treat it as that and know that you go in and this is your job to put on a show for them. And so to help organize that show and the way that you're presenting yourself, the next several slides are going to give you some ideas of specific things to be including as you structure that presentation. And so in the first couple of slides, it's important to think about what's that big problem? What's the big idea and the way in which I'm trying to represent the importance of the work that I'm taking on. And this goes back to your conceptual model. And how do you think about situating the specific studies that you might be talking about in your job talk to that big problem? And this is the so whatness. This is the why is this important for folks? And so to help think specifically about presenting the why is this important, think about briefly highlighting some of the relevant research that exists, and think about, are there certain stakeholder groups that you want to make sure that you're connecting with? And that's one of the things that I loved about the examples from Eric is that he presents that in a very organized sort of way that you can see these are the people that we're hoping to impact through this work. These are the people that are a big part of how we go about conducting this work. And it conveys not only the situational, here's where I am right now, but this is how this impact can continue to spread over time with the work that you take up. The other thing to also be thinking about here is as you prepare what you're talking about, are there ways to stitch in other experiences that you have, other service activities, teaching? And this is where, as you think about those stakeholder groups, how do you use the research that you're involved with and the studies and the program of research that you're taking up to show a connection to other stakeholder groups that are part of what we consider to be that tripartite mission of being at an institution around research, teaching, and service? And are there little examples I can stitch into how I'm presenting my work that convey that I connect what I learned through research to my teaching or the way that I teach, or different engaged communities that I work with to support the work that I do? All of that just helps to present a more rounded picture of what you're doing.
Leanne, can I?
Stephanie, do you want to add? Yeah, please.
I was going to say, I remember too in my early job talks that sometimes it was challenging to situate my own work within the very big shoes of Doug Fuchs and the very large studies where we were working. So I was really careful to make sure that I identified or distinguished what were the big research questions that I was working on with my advisor and with our research team versus what was unique to ideas that I had brought. And it was that was challenging for me. And so I think thinking in advance about how you might react to questions, but not coming across. I've also seen job talks where people have presented their data or research questions when they're one author in a long chain of authors, and they didn't situate what their role was in the work, and it almost came across as if they were taking all the credit for it.
Yep. Yeah, no, those are really important points to keep in mind, is that you do want to make sure that as you are situating yourself, that you want to present yourself as somebody with authority and your own identity, but making sure that folks understand that you see your place in the work that you're doing has its place relative to the work of others. And so how that gets either conveyed through the conceptual model or referencing those other research questions and larger studies that create a context for the nuanced sorts of work that you're taking on are really important. And I don't think that undermines your capacity or authority as you present your own work, because it is important for you to convey your own identity in the work. But that it does need to, if there are clear connections to other larger studies or more recognized figures that you don't shy away from just acknowledging that. That really actually helps to bolster your credibility with different groups that you're speaking with. So once you have gotten through those first couple of ways that slides that help you situate your work and help build a priority and interest in the so whatness, and you have people connecting to here's who I am and here's what I'm, the work that I'm taking up, the meat of the job talk then becomes about what is it that we are actually, what's the work that I have done. And here's where you have a really unique opportunity to be thoughtful about who is my audience, what institution or entity am I talking with right now, and how do I convey what I'm doing that will help them connect to me and the work that I have been taking up and want them to see that I will continue in the years to come. And this is all about how you are contributing to this generation of knowledge. And I think, you know, we've sat through a number of job talks at our university where we've had folks come in and present one specific study, and they talk about what they learned from that one specific study. And it was fine, but it didn't present this idea of this study is generating knowledge that will help to address a larger problem and a need in the field. And so if you come into this with the frame of, I want to present the knowledge that my work generates and the ways in which I'm trying to contribute to addressing certain problems in a larger way, then those specific studies can be carefully described in a way that presents them not just as one specific study that's a one-off and done, but it's part of a much bigger plan. And I know that a number of you are thinking about wanting to be at a research institution where that's the priority. And so you want to make sure that you are identifying that knowledge generation being related to the research activities that you would be taking up and the primary needs of the field and the future needs of the field. If you are headed into an institution where it really holds more of a teacher prep priority, then it's thinking about, well, what are the principles that I want to bring forward and how I want to prepare teachers? What are the things that I've learned and have been a part of that help me convey these are the priorities for preparing our next generation of teachers? So that as you start to talk about that, you can address, here were things that need to happen for teachers out in the field, and here's how my work is going to help address those things. And so the idea here then is for that set of slides to be able to hone in on a couple of key things, whether that's things that it's one study or two studies, but things that present sort of that cohesive set of things that tell that story about the knowledge being generated for solving a research-based problem or the knowledge being generated to help support teacher preparation. I want to now think, what's the cohesive story that I can best tell through a select set of studies or pieces of work that I've been a part of? And trying to prioritize and select, what do I talk about? Because I know as MCLII scholars, you guys are involved in a ton of different things. And so being really thoughtful about the things that are most meaningful to telling the story. You don't want to give a laundry list and throw in the kitchen sink of everything. They'll have your vita, they'll have lots of time to sit and talk with you about different things that you've been a part of. So this is where this is a performance and a show, and you're trying to put forward your best story about yourself. So think about, again, who's the audience that I'm in front of today giving this job talk, and what are the things that are going to help me connect with them in terms of a study that I have done or the kind of work that I've been doing. As you then present that, you want to organize around, here's a couple of really relevant citations. It's maybe work that you know others who are part of the audience will know, or things that are really prominent to the field that help support, this is why these things are important. And then as you get into being able to talk about those specific studies, you want to give them enough information to understand what you did, but this is also your opportunity to convey, these are skills that I have. These are the kinds of things that I've been doing that I will carry with me in the work that I move forward with. So you do also want to think in terms of, as I select certain efforts and studies that I've been a part of, is it about survey design? Is it about HLM? Is it about, what about those sorts of things also give me a chance to quick represent the things that I'll bring to the table and carry forward in the work that I'll do. And then if you've been able to disseminate any of your work so far, make sure that you throw in those citations so that people see that you're actively engaged in dissemination, and then present the description of what you learned. Go ahead, Stephanie.
Yeah, I might jump into knowing where to emphasize and highlight what Leanne's saying about really knowing your audience. It's a very different interview at Vanderbilt where you would potentially have multiple colleagues in special ed, but many of you may be interviewing in other institutions where there may only be one or two folks in special ed. And so being able to select studies that show more broadly, this kind of is in relation to Lisa's question, thinking about if you were trying to choose among studies, if you're at an institution where you know the dean strongly supports quantitative research, then you might be well placed to put your best quantitative foot forward. If you're at if you're interviewing at an institution that might have, I can remember interviewing in reading positions as well as in special ed positions, and some where the two departments were not of the same sort of philosophy. So really portraying yourself as you are is important, but thinking about customizing that for the different audiences and the size of faculty.
Yeah, thank you. So I think and you'll see some additional thoughts around that as we talk about minefields and potholes, but those are really, as much as you can learn about your audience as you're preparing the job talk, you can stitch in references and your own speaking references to, here's something I've done, or here's how I've approached this, that helps you better connect with your audience. So then the final couple of slides that you would have, this is where, as you wrap it up, and again, sort of in storytelling mode, it's not just here's what I found from this specific study. It's here's the knowledge that I've gained and the things that we've learned that help provide the foundation for the work that I'm going to take up in the next 1 to 2 years, and then the work that I can take up in the next 3 to 5 years. So all of that helps to present this idea of, I have some pilot work that I can do that sets me up for a big grant, or if I'm at a teaching institution, there are things that I know I want to take up and start to represent in the work that I would do in preparing teachers, but then there's some larger sorts of ways that I would approach obtaining leadership training grants or teacher preparation grants and things that would support these priorities that I want to present around who I am and the work that I want to take up. And so just keep those things in mind, is that it's not like your typical, here's what we learned and some discussion points about it. This is you telling the story of your launching pad from your job talk and the work that you've done so far, and where are you headed from that launching pad. And then just a couple of final notes as you think about structuring your job talk, is that there are ways to weave in some of these things that help you connect to your audience or better convey a more comprehensive picture of who you are. And so we've listed just a few of those things here around NCLII or other teaching that you've done, service activities, community engagement. These are just ways to once again present a more comprehensive look at who are you and the things that you'll bring to the table. What I encourage you to think about doing, and I did this through my own preparation for talks and have worked with some of my students to do this as well, of actually creating your script as you prepare your job talk, whether it's just the first part of it to help you know that you know exactly how you're going to start it, or just the last part of it to make sure that you know how you want to end it. But especially if you're trying to, you know, in Stephanie's example of, I know the dean wants to hear me talk about quantitative research because that's a high value, to know that I've got a clear plan for when I'm going to slide in certain bits of information and little tidbits about what I've done and how I've done it. Sometimes a script helps you to accomplish that and make sure it doesn't get forgotten, because, you know, you're going to feel like this is kind of a high pressure show that you're putting on for folks. So the more you've practiced and got that script down for, okay, here's on this slide, I'm going to make sure I mention this thing because that's going to help me convey this and connect with folks. Make sure you've got those things planned out, and sometimes a script can be helpful to support that. So at this point, we wanted you to take just a minute and give us a little bit of information about if you've thought about the work that you would be presenting. What do you think will be your primary source of the work that you've been doing that you think will be what will ground most of your job talk? And if you could just give us, click on the option there that best characterizes what you're thinking at this point. And then once you've got your primary, we will give you an opportunity to select a secondary. This is just helpful information for us. So I'll give you just a minute to respond. And if this is the first time you're starting to think about it, it's good to start thinking about it. Okay, so I'll share the responses we have at this point. So it looks like a lot of dissertation, other things that you've been a part of. That's good. Now, have you also then thought about something else? If you have a different set of information that you think will help bolster the story that you're telling, if you could tell us a little bit about where that's coming from. Give it just another second or two. So other research. So it looks like there's a lot of other things that you guys are involved with through your programs that are helping to support your work. So that's great. That's great. So I would imagine that as you now start to prepare for what you'll be talking about and in your job talk, that this is a time where there may be some other questions that come up, other things that you're starting to think about, and how to structure this. And so we wanted to pause for a minute here and give you a chance to offer your thoughts and pose some questions. And so there's a text box down at the bottom that you'll see on your screen that if you want to just type in there and hit post, you'll start to see ideas start to show up. I will go ahead and post something here. And as you see people post their questions, you can choose to like it if you want, just to give us a sense of if you're thinking similar things as others, or if you have different ideas. We'll just pause for a minute if you've got some questions. Well, so I'll share my thoughts here real quick, and then we will, what we'll do at the very end here is we're going to leave another posting open for you guys to just post more questions to make sure that they are able to be addressed down in Austin, because we aren't going to get through all of it today. But to help in your thinking about how to start to structure this going into Austin, I think, and Stephanie, I'll be curious what your thoughts are, that a dissertation doesn't necessarily need to be too terribly far along. I do think that if you are presenting to a job talk for a research institution, you do need to have some data to present. And if your dissertation isn't at that point, then I would pick something else that you've been a part of, that you're able to present a completed picture of a study that you've been a part of. And if your dissertation is something that's feeding off of that, but you aren't very far in data collection, then I think it's fine to talk about that. That's why that conceptual framework becomes so important, is how you present the cohesiveness of the work and where you're headed. But I don't think your dissertation necessarily needs to be fully complete, as long as you have something else that you can pull in that represents, I've been a part of a study, start to finish, and you can reflect those pieces.
Yeah.
Stephanie, do you have other thoughts on that?
I agree and completely, Leanne. And I'm also watching our time and realizing we're getting kind of close. I do think that it's important to balance, to really show your strengths. And if you've got a choice of a couple of things, then choose the strength that's something that they need. And I'm both happy to continue to answer more specific questions too about dissertation data.
Yeah, good. So we'll go ahead and talk just real quickly about the minefields and potholes, just as some reminders about things to be prepared for and thinking about as you go into preparing your job talk. And then again, we'll leave the opportunity to ask more questions to be discussed down in Austin available when we're done here. So one of the things that we have both been referencing is this idea of knowing your audience, but making sure that you have enough of a sense that you aren't presenting, that there isn't a mismatch that gets perceived early on in this process in how you present yourself and what the priorities are of the hiring entity. And so as you think about what do I know about this job? Who have I talked to that can tell me about this job? Those are important things to know. And the diversity of the group that's there. And when I say diversity, I'm speaking about professionally. If this is solely a special ed department or a department that's made up of lots of different professional orientations, then those are important things to think about. And then some things that we wanted to make sure that we called to your attention to help you avoid some of the things that we've seen occur for folks or have heard about, that you make sure that you understand who you're talking to throughout this whole process, but also in how you present your job talk. It's important to make sure that you're aware of who do you expect to be in the room or potentially in the room, who are they, what are their priorities. And so we've given you some our laundry list of here's the homework we think you should do in advance to help prepare yourself for this, with knowing who the folks are, what sorts of research projects are currently being run through that department and the university in general, the kinds of things that people have been publishing about, what are they currently working on, those types of things. And that you are prepared to then know who the people are, whether that's knowing more about the city or things that you've learned about them personally that help you connect in a personal level with folks while you're there. And then some other little things that we wanted to make sure that we called to your attention to think about in preparing for your job talks is that you're aware of what the culture and the expectations are of your audience. Is it a group that will have read something that you've published ahead of time? Are they going to want to interact with you and ask questions throughout the job talk? And you'll see some tips for how to handle some of those things on the readings that we've shared with you. But also know that sometimes things just happen and you'll have to be prepared to roll with that, whether technology doesn't work and you need to make sure that you've got copies of things available, those kinds of things. So I know that we're starting to run out of time here. What we can do is just, why don't we skip over this part and make sure that Stephanie takes a moment to talk about different ways that you might want to consider personalizing, and then we'll leave the question board open at the end.
Sure. We really have focused mostly on tenure track jobs. We want you guys to know that sometimes when you go for a tenure track position, you might be asked to do a teaching talk. You might even be asked to teach a class. Remember that if you're going to be doing a postdoc, you're going to want to spend more time talking about the methodological strengths that you're bringing to the job, because your mentor will definitely want to know what you can do to help extend their research. And you need to balance not just your own stuff, but how can your stuff contribute to somebody else's work. Some of you may end up having interest to be methodologists or experts at different types of institutions. And so we certainly can link you with other students of ours that have gotten jobs at various places like WestEd or ETS. And then I think our next slide, there we go, is just kind of a summary to have fun and enjoy your time meeting people that you might potentially be spending the next 5 or so years with. And I think I've collaborated with a lot of people that I met during job talks. Don't forget to share your food with others and never eat during your actual job talk. There's lots of people that have very funny stories about that. So I think to emphasize what Leanne was saying is just feeling prepared, having a chance to practice. And so Austin will be some beginning steps for many of you.
So I think that from here we will bid you good luck as you start to think about how to structure a job talk that you can be preparing for Austin and getting some feedback on. We encourage you to talk with your advisor prior to going to Austin. Your advisor is a really key resource in helping to think through how to structure that conceptual framework and the different pieces of work that you've been involved with that help to present the best story about the work that you're doing and the path that you're headed down. And so with that, I think our hope was to now leave you with an opportunity to post more questions. And so if there are things that you want to go ahead and just add to the question board here, these are all going to be gathered so that there's an opportunity to make sure that they're addressed while you're sitting together in Austin and comparing notes and commiserating about the process together. And so with that, I think we will go ahead and end the actual webinar at this point. We will sort of hang here though and watch the questions come in and hope that you'll take just a couple minutes to post some questions before you go ahead and sign off completely, and wish you good luck from here.
Absolutely, you guys. And if you have any specific questions that are really pressing, please also feel free to email either of us if you didn't feel comfortable asking them in front of the group.
Absolutely.
I have a quick question. Are these slides going to be available somewhere that we can go back and reference them?
Yeah, we will make sure that Terrell sends them out, and the webinar is being recorded as well.
Awesome. Thank you. It was very helpful.